Welcome, wanderers of the shadowed vale, to Throne of Nightmares. Here, in the velvet hush of midnight's embrace, we do not merely tell tales. We summon them. We breathe life into the ghosts that claw at the edges of forgotten history, the specters that feast on the marrow of our complacency. Tonight, as the autumn gales rattle your windows and the floorboards creak with unseen footsteps, we descend into a labyrinth of iron and insatiable hunger. A story so profane, so steeped in the copper tang of blood and the rot of betrayal, that it has been scrubbed from the annals of polite society. Yet it lingers, doesn't it? In the flicker of candlelight on a butler's gloved hand, in the wide smile of a maid as she serves the evening's roast. Imagine, if you dare, a mansion not built of stone and mortar, but of iron. Cold, unyielding iron that weeps rust like tears of blood in the rain. The Iron Mansion, they called it, perched on the jagged cliffs of Blackwater Cove, where the sea gnaws at the land like a starved beast. Erected in the fevered haze of 1847, during the height of the Irish famine's shadow creeping across the Atlantic, this behemoth of a home was the folly of one Elias Hawthorne, a man whose fortune was forged in the fires of colonial exploitation. Sugar plantations in the Caribbean, textile mills in Manchester, and whispers of opium dens in Calcutta. But wealth, my friends, is a hollow throne when built on the bones of the desperate. And desperation? It breeds monsters. Our tale begins not with screams, but with silence. The kind of silence that presses against your eardrums, thick as congealed fat, broken only by the distant crash of waves against iron, spiked rocks below. It is the year 1892. And the Hawthorne line clings to its legacy like a drowning man to driftwood. Elias is long dead, his corpse pickled in a vault beneath the mansion's cellars, but his widow, Lady Isolde Hawthorne, rules with the brittle authority of a porcelain doll cracked by time. She is a spectre herself, pale as moonlight on milk, her gowns whispering secrets as she glides through halls lined with portraits whose eyes seem to follow you, judging, hungering. And then there are the servants. Oh, the servants, 20 souls in all, a cadre of the forgotten Irish immigrants with famine, hollowed cheeks, Scottish crofters displaced by the Highland clearances, and a smattering of Eastern European wanderers who fled pogroms across the sea. They arrived at the Iron Mansion not as chattel, but as salvation, or so they believed. Lady Isolde promised shelter, sustenance, a place in the grand machinery of the household. But the mansion's kitchens were barren echoes, its larders stocked with tin provisions that tasted of tin and despair. The pay was meager, doled out in copper coins that burned cold in their palms. And yet they stayed. Why? Because the world beyond the iron gates was a maw of worse hungers, starvation, plague, the news of vagrancy laws. But hunger is a sly thing, isn't it? It doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It slithers in on whispers, on the gnaw of empty bellies in the dead of night. It twists loyalty into something feral, something with teeth. Tonight, we unveil the cannibal servants of the Iron Mansion, a household's Macabre rebellion, a chronicle of how the served became the devourers, how the chains of servitude forged not obedience, but a feast of retribution. Lean in closer, dear listener. Feel the chill draft at your neck, the prickle of eyes upon you from the shadows. For in this story no one is innocent, and the banquet has only just begun. Let us start at the hearth of it all, the kitchens, buried deep in the mansion's bowels, where the air hangs heavy with the scent of damp stone and smouldering peat. It is a place of flickering gas lamps and cast iron stoves that belch smoke like the breaths of damned souls. Here, under the watchful eye of head cook Magnus O'Flannery, a hulking Irishman with a beard like tangled brambles and eyes that gleam like polished obsidian, the servants gather at dawn's reluctant blush. Magnus, once a fisherman from Galway, lost his family to the blight of 47, his hands scarred from hauling nets through typhoons of hunger. He wields his cleaver not with malice, but with the precision of a surgeon dissecting a lie. "Mate," he would mutter, his voice a rumble of thunder trapped in a cave, is the great equalizer. It binds us all in the end. Beside him toils Eliza Croft, a scullery maid, a slip of a girl from the Scottish moors, her skin translucent as onion paper, her fingers nimble as spider legs spinning webs of dough. Elisa dreams in Gaelic whispers of heather fields and warm porridges that never come. Then there is Victor the butler, a Pole with a face carved from granite, his moustache a broom of suspicion sweeping away indiscretions. Victor serves the wine with a bow that hides the tremor in his limbs, the ghost pains of a Cossack's whip across his back. And lurking in the corners the footmen, twins from the Carpathians, Luca and Dmitri, with smiles that split too wide, revealing teeth filed sharp in some forgotten ritual of their mountain folk. Lady Isolde, from her perch in the drawing-room, sees none of this. She sips her absinthe, laced tea, her world a tapestry of lace and lies, embroidered by the hands of those she deems lesser. The Hawthorns host lavish soirees for the elite of Blackwater Cove. Ship captains flush with pirate gold, industrial barons with soot, blackened souls, feasts where pheasant and venison flow like rivers of excess. The servants watch from the wings, their stomachs a chorus of hollow hymns as platters are carried past, steam rising like incense to gods who do not care. But cracks form in the facade, subtle as the first frost on a windowpane. It begins with the missing scraps. A haunch of mutton vanishes from the cold larder one moonless night. Blame falls on the rats, those eternal scapegoats of the underclass. Then a chambermaid, poor wee Fiona from Dublin, complains of a soreness in her jaw, as if something unyielding had lodged there. She spits a shard of bone into her palm, white and splintered, and Magnus examines it by lamplight. Lamb, he declares, but his eyes betray the lie. Lamb bones do not curve, so do not whisper of a human curve. Whispers spread like mold through the servants' quarters. A warren of damp cells beneath the mansion's east wing, where beds are pallets of straw and the air tastes of mildew and regret. In the dead hour, when the house slumbers under its iron roof that groans like a dying giant, they convene. Magnus presides, his cleaver laid upon the scarred oak table like Excalibur drawn from stone. "We've served him long enough," he growls, his voice weaving through the gloom. "Flesh of the earth for the lords of the manor." But the earth hungers back. Victor nods, his fingers tracing the scars on his wrists, marks from chains long broken, but never forgotten. Elisa, her eyes wide as saucers in the candle's flicker, clutches a rosary of bone beads, murmuring prayers to saints who avert their gaze. The pact is sealed not with blood, but with bread, a meagre loaf, broken and shared, each crumb a vow. They will sustain themselves, they swear, on what the mansion provides. But the larder empties faster now, the hunts for game in the fog, shrouded woods yield less. Desperation sharpens appetites, and appetites turn inward. The first to fall is not a Hawthorn, but old Mr. Greeley. The gamekeeper, a crusty Englishman with a limp and a flask of gin ever at his lips. He vanishes during a storm, his lantern found bobbing in the tide pools below, smashed to flinders. The constabulary rules it accident, a slip on the slick iron stairs. But in the kitchens, Magnus serves a stew that night, thick and savory, with chunks that melt on the tongue like forbidden fruit. The servants eat in silence, the only sound the lap of spoons against bowls, and in their eyes a spark ignites, a feral gleam, the birth of rebellion. Lady Isolde notices the change, of course. The servants move with a new purpose, their steps silent as cats on the prowl, their glances lingering too long on the curve of a throat, the swell of a cough. At dinner, as she picks at her solamandine, she catches Victor staring, his pupils dilated like black moons. "Has the wine not to your liking, my lady?" he asks, his voice silk over steel. She waves him away, but the chill settles in her bones, a premonition of the storm brewing below stairs. And so the tension coils, a serpent in the garden of excess. The iron mansion, with its walls that seem to lean inward, listening, becomes a pressure cooker of suppressed rage. Outside, the gales howl prophecies of doom, the sea a chorus of drowned voices calling for justice. Inside, the air thickens with the scent of something primal, sweat and fear and the faint, metallic tang of blood yet to be spilled. What happens when the devoured rise to devour? When the chains of hunger snap, and the banquet tables turn to altars of reckoning? Hold tight, my shadowed kin, for we have only tasted the appetizer. The main course awaits in the depths of this macabre feast. The rebellion stirs, and with it, horrors that will make your skin crawl like insects in the grave. Stay with me, for the night is young, and the Iron Mansion hungers still. Dawn breaks over Blackwater Cove like a reluctant confession, painting the Iron Mansion in hues of bruised purple and ash grey. The cliffs stand sentinel, their faces scarred by centuries of salt and storm, while the mansion itself squats upon them like an iron-clad gargoyle, its turrets piercing the low-hanging clouds. Fog rolls in from the Atlantic, tendrils coiling around the wrought iron balustrades, muffling the cries of gulls that wheel overhead. Harbingers, perhaps, of the carrion to come. Within the servants' quarters, the air is stale, laced with the sour reek of unwashed bodies and the faint, acrid bite of lye soap. Magnus O'Flannery rises first, as always, his massive frame unfolding from the pallet like a bear from hibernation. His joints creak in protest, echoes of old fractures from brawls in famine-ravaged ports. He lights the stub of a tallow candle, its flame guttering in the draught from cracked walls and pads to the communal wash basin. The water is icy, drawn from a pump that tastes of rust and the sea's brine. As he splashes his face, droplets tracing rivulets down his beard, he meets his reflection in the warped mirror. A man hollowed by want, eyes sunken like pits in a skull. The others stir soon after. Eliza Croft curls tighter under her threadbare blanket, her dreams haunted by visions of moors ablaze with heather, now choked by thistles of memory. She was 14 when the clearances came, her croft burned by lairds in Tweed, who called it progress. Sold to a mill in Glasgow, she spun thread until her fingers bled, then fled across the ocean on a coffin ship, the holds reeking of cholera and despair. The Iron Mansion was to be rebirth, instead it is a tomb with a pulse. She rises, slipping into her uniform, a starched black dress that itches like penance, apron tied with trembling hands. Victor Kowalski, the butler, is already dressed, his livery impeccable despite the moths nibbling at its hems. He polishes his shoes with a rag that was once his mother's shawl, smuggled from Warsaw in the lining of his coat. The pogroms there were biblical. Flames-licking synagogues, Cossacks with sabers thirsty for Jewish blood. Victor survived by hiding in cellars, feeding on rats and rainwater, emerging with a hatred that simmers like vodka in his veins. He serves the Hawthorns not out of loyalty, but calculation. The mansion is a fortress, and fortresses fall from within. The twins, Luka and Dmitry Volkov, share a bunk like wolves in a den, their breaths synchronized in sleep. From the Carpathian peaks, where vampires are not myth but neighbors, they fled after a blood feud with a boyar who claimed their sister's virtue. Their teeth, filed to points in a ritual to ward off Strigoi, click softly as they murmur in Romanian. They are the footmen, silent shadows who carry trays and secrets with equal grace. Breakfast is a ritual of scarcity, watery gruel flavored with salt herring, portions measured by Magnus's unyielding eye. They eat in the scullery, a cramped alcove off the main kitchen, where the walls weep condensation and the floor is perpetually slick with grease. Conversation is sparse, laced with the Gaelic burrs and Slavic inflections that form their private tongue. The mistress calls for the silver, Victor announces, his voice a blade sheathed in velvet, and the young master returns tonight from Eton, fresh meat for the table. A ripple passes through the group, eyes flicking to one another, spoons pausing mid-air. Young Master Theodore Hawthorne, heir to the Iron Throne, is a lanky youth of 17, all sharp angles and sharper appetites. Schooled in the classics at Eton, he returns for the summer with tales of cricket greens and Oxford dreams, oblivious to the forge of resentment below. Last visit he had cornered Eliza in the linen closet, his breath hot with entitlement, hands groping like blind eels. She had escaped with a slap and a stain on her sleeve, but the memory festers. The day unfolds in the mansion's iron grip. The Iron Mansion is a marvel of Victorian excess, its facade a riot of Gothic spires and lancet windows framed in black wrought iron that twists into thorns and serpents. Inside, The halls stretch like veins, pulsing with gaslight that casts long shadows dancing like imps. The grand staircase spirals upward, its banisters cold to the touch, engraved with hawthorn crests, a hawk clutching a bleeding heart. Lady Isolde's chambers occupy the east tower, a sanctum of velvet drapes and ormolu clocks that chime the hours with mechanical indifference. The servants disperse like smoke. Eliza to the silver pantry, where she buffs forks until they gleam like fangs, the twins to the boot room, blacking leather with vigor that borders on violence, Victor to the butler's pantry, inventorying wines that will never touch their lips. Magnus retreats to the kitchens, his domain a cavern of copper pots, suspended like gibbets, ovens roaring with coal-fed fury. He chops vegetables with rhythmic thuds, carrots snapping like brittle bones, onions releasing tears that sting like accusations. By midday, the air thickens with the aroma of roasting fowl, a capon stuffed with prunes and sage, destined for the family table. But as Magnus bastes the bird, turning it on the spit, a shadow falls across the threshold. It's Mrs. Prudence Blackwood, the housekeeper, a withered crone from Cornwall, her face a map of wrinkles etched by witch hunts long past. She is the bridge between worlds, loyal to Isolde with a ferocity born of fear. The larder runs low again, cook. She rasps, her voice like dry leaves skittering over graves. No more beef till market day. Make do with offal. Magnus's cleaver pauses, hovering above a slab of liver, purple and glistening. Offal. The scraps, the innards, the parts no lord would touch. Offal it is, then, he replies, his tone even, but his knuckles whiten on the handle. Prudence lingers, her eyes narrowing like slits in a confessional. And mind the portions for the staff. No pilfering, O'Flannery. The mistress has eyes everywhere. As she departs, her footsteps echoing up the servant's stair. Magnus exhales a breath heavy with peat smoke. He glances at the door to the cold room, where slabs of meat hang like pendulums, swaying gently. The gamekeeper's absence has left gaps, hooks empty, shadows where flesh should be. He remembers the stew, the way it fortified their bones, the way it silenced the gnawing. A temptation whispers just a sliver for the pot. Upstairs, Lady Isolde prepares for the homecoming. She stands before a full-length mirror framed in iron filigree, her reflection fractured into shards of pale elegance. At 52, she is a relic of belle époque glamour, her hair piled in auburn coils threaded with pearls, her corset cinching her waist to fragility. Elias's death left her widowed and wealthy, but the mansion devours both. Leaks in the roof like weeping wounds, draughts that carry the sea's chill into her bones. She dabs lavender water at her wrists, masking the faint scent of camphor from her medicinal tonics. Theodore is her anchor, her future, the boy who will marry some heiress and fill these halls with laughter again, or so she dreams. The afternoon wanes, the sun a pallid disk sinking behind the cliffs, bleeding crimson into the waves. The servants converge in the hall, liveried in black and white, a phalanx of deference. Carriages crunch on the gravel drive, guests arriving early for the welcome feast. Captain Hargrove, ruddy, cheeked from rum runs to the Indies. Dr. Elias Montague, a surgeon with hands steady as a hangman's, and their wives, bejeweled vultures picking at gossip. Theodore arrives at dusk, the hawthorn baruch rattling through the gates, its lanterns swinging like yours. He steps down, tall and coltish, his Eton blazer rumpled, cricket bat slung over his shoulder like a swagger stick. "Mother!" he calls, embracing Isolde with boyish vigor, planting a kiss on her cheek that lingers too long. His eyes, hawthorn blue, scan the assembled servants with proprietorial glee. They fall into bows and curtsies, a murmur of "Welcome home, sir." Victor's hand steadies the young master's trunk, fingers brushing the leather with deceptive gentleness. Luca and Dmitri flank the entrance, their filed teeth hidden behind tight smiles. Eliza averts her gaze, cheeks flushing with old shame. Magnus waits in the wings, the dinner bell his summons. The feast commences in the dining hall, a cavernous space where chandeliers drip crystal tears, illuminating a table groaning under silver domes. The capon is carved with ceremony, juices pooling like blood on porcelain. Wine flows, claret from Bordeaux, deep as garnet wounds. Lotta rings, toasts to the hare's return, tales of schoolboy pranks and imperial glories. Below stairs, the servants dine on leavings gristle and gruel, the capon's carcass stripped to bones. But tonight Magnus has added a flourish, a ragout of hare, dark and gamey, simmered with rosemary and secret. They eat ravenously, the flavors bursting on tongues starve for savor. Eliza licks her lips, a drop of gravy tracing her chin like a lover's kiss. "It's different," she whispers, and Victor nods, his mustache twitching. "Better." As the clock strikes 10, the household retires. Guests to the West Wing, family to their chambers, servants to their dens, but sleep evades them. In the kitchens, embers glow like eyes in the dark. Magnus cleans his cleaver, the whetstone singing a lullaby of edge. The pact renews in glances, the hunger grows, and with it the plan. Tomorrow, the market brings supplies, but also opportunity. A peddler, perhaps, or a vagrant drawn by lights on the cliff. Unseen in the rafters above the cold larder, something rustles. Not rats, but memories, bones picked clean, hidden in niches, awaiting the fire. The iron mansion breathes, its iron lungs filling with the scent of impending storm. Theodore, in his bed, dreams of conquests, Isolde of legacies. But the servants dream of feasts where roles reverse, where the masters are trussed and tenderized. And outside, the fog thickens, swallowing the world. The sea whispers invitations to the deep. The rebellion simmers, a pot on the boil, lid rattling with pressure. What boils over first, loyalty or flesh? The night deepens over the iron mansion, a shroud woven from ink and ice. Stars prick the velvet sky like distant needle pricks, but the fog devours their light, leaving only the mansion's gas lamps as beacons, lures for moths with wings of flesh. In the servants' quarters, sleep is a fitful thief, stealing moments between the creak of timbers and the distant roar of surf crashing against iron reefs. Dreams bleed into wakefulness, visions of banquets where the tablecloth is skinned, the napkins twists of tendon. Dawn creeps in reluctantly, a thief in grey motley, and the household stirs to its grim ballad. Magnus is at the ovens before the cocks crow, kneading dough with fists that could crush skulls. The market run falls to Luca and Dmitri, the twins drawing lots with carved bones from their pocket. They harness the pony cart, a rickety contraption with wheels that squeal like banshees, and rumble down the cliff path, the mansion receding like a crouching predator. Blackwater Cove's market is a riot of desperation, stalls hawking wilted cabbages and fish stiff with rigor, hawkers shouting over the din of bartering tongues. The twins weave through the throng, their dark eyes scanning for weakness. A limping beggar, a drunkard slumped against barrels. Opportunity presents itself in the form of old Tom the Tinker, a itinerant peddler from the Cornish tin mines, his cart laden with pots, pans and dubious elixirs. Tom is a wisp of a man, rheumy-eyed and reeking of pastis, his fingers gnarled as driftwood. "Spare a coin for a hot meal, lads." Tom wheezes as they haggle over a sack of onions. Luca smiles, too wide, teeth glinting. "Mealtime's our trade, old man. Come back with us, warm hearth, full belly." Dmitri nods, his voice a sibilant echo. "The mistress is generous to wanderers." Tom, warmed by their flattery and the promise of shelter from the drizzle, climbs aboard. The cart trundles back up the path, the pony's hooves clipping against stone like the tick of a fuse. Back at the mansion, the morning unfolds in whispers of normalcy. Eliza scrubs the breakfast silver, her reflection in the teapot a ghost of herself. Eyes ringed with fatigue, lips chapped from biting back curses. Victor oversees the polishing of the drawing room, directing footmen with snaps of his cufflink. But his mind wanders to the pact's evolution. Last night's ragout was a sacrament, today's edition will be communion. Lady Isolde descends for her elevances, a tray of buttered scones and Darjeeling, served by a trembling chambermaid. She pores over ledgers in the morning room, quills scratching like claws on slate. The estate bleeds money, repairs to the iron gutters that funnel rainwater like tears, bribes to customs men for Theodore's imported vices. "Victor," she calls, her voice a silken command, "see that the cellars are inventoried. I suspect pilferage." Victor bows, his shadow pooling at her feet like spilled ink. As you wish, my lady. All will be accounted for. The twins arrive at noon, Tom in tow, his tinker's pack slung over one shoulder. Magnus greets them at the kitchen door, his smile a crescent moon of malice. A guest for supper, Luca announces, clapping Tom on the back. The old man chuckles, oblivious, warming his hands at the stove. Hey, smells like heaven in here. What's for the pot? Magnus's eyes crinkle. Something special. Hare, perhaps. Or venison. Tom is installed in the tack room off the stables, a dank nook with straw bales and the ghosts of horses long sold for glue. He dozes fitfully, lulled by the rhythm of rain pattering on the slate roof, unaware of the eyes watching from the hayloft. Victor's, calculating weights and measures. Afternoon brings the first fracture. Theodore, restless with idleness, prowls the grounds, cricket bat in hand, walking at gorse bushes like foes on the pitch. He corners Eliza in the herb garden, the air thick with rosemary and regret. Still the shy violet. Hey, he leers, stepping close, his breath laced with tobacco and entitlement. Eliza backs against the iron trellis, thorns pricking her palms. Please, sir, the washing law. But his hand clamps her wrist, bruising. Father always said servants were for serving, always. She twists free. Fleeing to the scullery, tears hot as solder. Word spreads like grease fire. In the kitchens, as Magnus butchers carrots with vicious hacks, Eliza recounts the assault in hushed tones. The servants circle, a coven of resentment. Victor paces, his boots thudding like heartbeats. The boys are blight, like his father before him. Elias took liberties with the maids, left them swelling or broken. Dmitri spits, a glob landing on the flagstones like an omen. In the mountains we geld wolves that hunt the flock. Luca's filed teeth flash, or serve them stewed. The decision crystallizes. Tom the tinker will be the trial, the proof of their resolve. As dusk falls, painting the cliffs in strokes of indigo and blood orange, Magnus lures the old man to the kitchens with promises of grog. A toast to old wanderers. He rumbles, pressing a tankard of ale into Tom's knobby hands. The servants gather ostensibly for chores, Victor chopping wood, Eliza peeling potatoes, the twins scouring pots, but their eyes are knives. Tom drains the tankard, belching contentment. Fine brew, lads. Reminds me of the mines, dark but warm. Magnus nods, his cleaver glinting under the lamp. A conversation turns to tales, Tom's yarns of shipwrecks and smugglers' coves, the servants' guarded murmurs of old countries. Then, subtly, Victor steers, ever wonder what it's like to be the story told, the ghost in the gale. Tom blinks, fuzz from the drug doll clouding his gaze. Stories are for bairns. But Magnus moves like shadow, a cloth pressed to the tinker's mouth, chloroform's sweet betrayal. Tom's struggles are feeble, limbs flailing like windmills in a squall. The twins bind him with twine from the larder, wrists and ankles trussed tight. Dragged to the cold room, he's hung from a hook like a side of beef, gag muffling his whimpers. The deed begins in the witching hour, when the mansion slumbers under laudanum dreams. Magnus wields the cleaver with reverence, the first incision precise, a Y across the chest, parting flesh like overripe fruit. Blood wells, dark and viscous, pattering onto the sawdust floor. The servants watch, breaths held, a circle of acolytes at an altar. Eliza turns away at the wet rip, but steals glances, fascination warring with nausea. Victor assists, holding limbs steady, his face a mask of clinical detachment. The twins chant low in Romanian, a dirge to forgotten gods of the hunt. Pieces are portioned, haunch for stew, ribs for roasting, offal for pâtier. Magnus works methodically, humming a Galway fisherman's lament, the tune warped by the charnel scent. Blood soaks his apron, turning it to rust, and he pauses to sip from a flask, watered gin, to steady the hands. No waste, he intones. The famine taught us that. By dawn, Tom is reduced bones boiled for stock, sinews rendered to tallow for lamps. The remnants, skull cracked for marrow, teeth strung for Eliza's new rosary, are consigned to the sea, weighted in a sack and cast from the cliffs at low tide. Morning brings a hush, the servants moving like somnambulists, fortified by the feast. Breakfast for the family is eggs and kippers, served with steady hands. Theodore yawns over his post, oblivious to the tremor in Victor's bow. Lady Isolde sips her chocolate, commenting on the fine weather for a promenade. But in the scullery, the rag-out simmers, chunks of Tom tenderizing in red wine reduction. The servants sup at noon, the flavor richer, deeper, a umami of iron and earth that fills the voids in their souls. To freedom, Magnus toasts softly, and they echo, forks clinking like sabers. Emboldened, the rebellion unfurls tendrils. Prudence Blackwood, the housekeeper, sniffs suspicion in the air. The kitchen's too clean, the servants too hale. She confronts Magnus in the pantry, her finger jabbing like a spindle. Where's the tinker? He was to mend the clocks. Magnus meets her gaze unflinching. Slipped away at first light, wanderers do. But Prudence's eyes narrow, and she reports to Isolde, whispers of irregularity seeding doubt. The days blur into a haze of duality. Above, the facade of civility, teas served, linens pressed, dinners orchestrated with precision. Below, the coven thrives. Another vanishes, a groom from the stables, young Jamie with freckles like foxfire, caught poaching apples from the orchard. His end is swifter, a garrote in the fog, body portioned in the tack room. The stew that night sings with youth, the servants' cheeks flushing with vigor, their steps lighter on the iron stairs. Theodore senses the shift, a prickle at his nape during evening billiards. Victor chalks his cue with deliberate slowness, eyes locking. A fine shot, sir. Straight to the heart. The boy laughs it off, but sleeps with a pistol under his pillow, dreams plagued by hounds with human faces. Climax brews on the eve of the full moon, when guests fill the halls for a masked ball, revelry to drown the mansion's moans. Costumes swill, Isolde as a Byzantine empress, Theodore as a cavalier with plume and rapier. Servants don liveries of crimson and gold, masks of feathers hiding filed grins. The ballroom throbs with waltz and champagne fizz, but in the kitchens, Magnus prepares the pie CDR assistants, a roast saddle of venison, Jamie's haunch glazed in juniper and blood orange. As the clock strikes midnight, the first scream pierces the masquerade. Prudence, poking in the cold larder for cheeses, discovers a finger. Tom's, ring still glinting, tucked in a crock of butter. She staggers back, keening, alerting the hall. Chaos erupts. Guests fleeing in silks torn on iron fittings, Isolde fainting into Montague's arms, Theodore drawing his rapier with a flourish turned to fear. The servants turn, no longer shadows but storm. Victor bars the doors with oaken beams, the twins wielding pokers like spears. Magnus emerges from the kitchens, cleaver in hand, apron stiff with crusting gore. The feast is served. He bellows, voice echoing off vaulted ceilings. Luca and Dmitri herd the guests to the dining hall, masks torn away, revealing terror, twisted faces. Isolde revives to horror, the table reset, domes lifted to reveal not capon, but limbs, pale and portioned, garnished with parsley like festive ribbons. "Monsters!" she shrieks, clawing at Magnus as he looms. Theodore lunges, rapier flashing, but Victor parries with a carving fork, the clash ringing like bells tolling doom. The rebellion consumes. Captain Hargrove is first, throat slit mid, plea blood arsing to stain the Aubusson rug. Dr. Montague, the surgeon, is trussed to the chandelier, vivisected alive. His screams a counterpoint to the waltz's ghost. The wives are herded to the cellars, their jewels pried free before the blade falls. Theodore fights like a cornered fox, rapier nicking Dimitri's cheek, but numbers overwhelm. Luca's teeth tearing at his calf, Victor's hands around his throat. Isolde, dragged to the high seat, watches her world unspool. "Why?" she gasps as Eliza, rosary clutched, whispers, "Because you fed on us first." The cleaver rises, falls. The iron mansion drinks deep that night, walls slick with slaughter, floors awash in the tide of retribution. Dawn finds silence, broken only by the sea's indifferent lullaby. The servants, sated at last, barricade the gates, the mansion their throne of bones. But hunger, eternal hunger, already stirs anew. Now, as the echoes of screams fade from our fevered minds, let us step back from the crimson threshold of the iron mansion and peer into the abyss from whence this tale slithers. For the cannibal servants is no mere phantasm spun from idle nightmare. It is a grotesque mirror held to the fractures of history, where the lines between fact and folklore blur like blood in water. We tread now the shadowed corridors of the past, where famines carved hollows in nations and class wars simmered beneath the stiff collars of empire. Prepare yourselves, for this context is no dry recitation. It is a chill wind carrying the dust of bones, the whispers of the starved. Let us begin with the cradle of this horror, the mid-19th century, a vortex of upheaval that reshaped the world in iron and ash. The Iron Mansion itself, constructed in 1847, stands as a monument to Victorian hubris, its materials shipped from the foundries of Sheffield and the quarries of Cornwall. Iron, that unyielding spine of the Industrial Revolution, symbolized progress, railways snaking across continents, bridges spanning chasms of isolation. Yet iron is also chains, manacles forged for the enslaved in southern plantations, for the convicts in Australian hulks. The Hawthorns, with their fortune rooted in colonial extraction, embodied this duality. Wealth, wrought from the sweat of the subaltern, laundered through Manchester mills where children as young as 5 toiled 16 hours amid looms that mangled limbs. But the true spectre haunting Blackwater Cove was the Great Famine of Ireland and Gorta Ma, 1845-1852, a cataclysm that devoured 1 million souls and drove another million to exile. Picture it, potato fields blackening under Phytophthora infestans, a fungus that turned sustenance to slime overnight. Ireland, under British Crown, exported grain and livestock even as tenants starved, their cabins emptied by evictions from landlords like the Hawthorns' ilk. The response? Soup kitchens doling out gruel thin to opacity, workhouses where families were sundered, the able-bodied set to breaking stones for roads to nowhere. Eyewitness accounts, etched in ledgers of horror, speak of fields of the dead. Corpses too weak to bury, grass eaten from gravesides in acts of ultimate desperation. From this inferno emerged survivors like Magnus O'Flannery, coffin ship voyagers who braved typhus-ridden holds to reach America's shores. Folklore bloomed in their wake, tales of the Derg Dew, the blood-drinking crone who rises from famine graves to prey on the wealthy, or the Abartak, a chieftain so vile he was buried thrice, only to claw free and demand tribute in gore. These are not whimsy, but cultural scar tissue, myths encoding the rage of the dispossessed, where the oppressed invert the food chain, devouring the devourers. Anthropologists like James Fraser in The Golden Bough noted parallels worldwide. Aztec Certicutli rituals consuming captives to appease gods of scarcity, or the Wendigo of Algonquian lore, a Wendigo psychosis where starvation twists men to cannibalistic goals. Across the Irish Sea, Scotland's Highland clearances, a 1750-1860 echoed this trauma. Lairds, aping English efficiency, evicted crofters for sheep pastures, burning homes in improvements that left glens as barren as moons. The 1840s potato blight amplified the purge, driving folk like Eliza Croft to urban slums or emigration. Scottish ballads, sung in Gaelic keening, immortalized the year of the burnings. Songs of spectral sheep devouring men, or the usage, water horse that lures the hungry to watery graves. Cultural historians, poring over Walter Scott's romanticized tartans, uncover the grit. Oral histories from the Hebrides recount black dinners, feudal feasts where traitors were served their own kin, heads baked in pies as Tudor-style retribution. Victor and the Volkov twins draw from Eastern Europe's cauldron. The Pale of Settlement, that Russian cordon for Jews festered with pogroms, 1881's waves of violence, sparked by Tsarist scapegoating after Alexander II's assassination. Mobs, inflamed by rumors of ritual murder, blood libels tracing to 1144 Norwich, where Christians accused Jews of crucifying boys for matzo. Raised shtetls leaving cellars slick with slaughter. Polish and Ukrainian folklore responds with golems, clay guardians animated to protect the vulnerable, and strigoi, undead kin who feast on the living, filed teeth a ward against their bite. The Carpathians, cradle of Dracula's Bram Stoker myth, inspired by Vlad the Impaler, 15th century Wallachian voivode who dined amid forests of skewered foes. Team with vampire cycles tied to famine cycles, 1848's revolutions there saw peasants stringing boyars from gibbets, their manors looted for salt to preserve the harvest of the fallen. Weave these threads, and the Iron Mansion emerges not as fiction, but archetype. Victorian England at its zenith hid rot beneath gaslight glamour. Charles Dickens chronicled workhouses in Oliver Twist, where gruel begs more, but real scandals lurked. The 19th century baby farming rings, where unwed mothers paid slumlords to, or adopt infants, only for the tots to be starved or smothered for insurance payouts. Or the 1888 Jack the Ripper murders in Whitechapel, eviscerations amid East End squalor, where prostitutes, many Irish famine orphans, were portioned like meat in a cannery. Press sensationalism dubbed it leather apron, evoking the slaughterhouse trade that employed the desperate. Globally, cannibalism's shadow loomed large. The Donner Party's 1846 American pioneers trapped in Sierra Nevada snows resorted to the unthinkable, survivors supping on the dead, tales twisted into frontier Gothic. In colonial Africa, Leopold VII's Congo Free State's 1885-1908 saw forced labor yield rubber at the cost of limbs hacked for quotas, villages pacified by eating their chiefs in ritual humiliation. Missionaries' journals, sanitized for London parlors, hint at reciprocal horrors. Porters consuming overseers in mutinies. Folklore bridges fact to fable. The Wendigo, as chronicled by ethnographer Paul Radine, embodies cannibal madness, a psychosis documented in Arctic explorers like the Franklin Expedition 1845, where lead poisoned crews vanished. Relics suggesting self-consumption. Haiti post-slave revolts has 1791-1804 zombie lore arose. Bokers feeding on the living by poisoning them into docility, mirroring plantation hungers. These motifs converge in the Iron Mansion. Servants as Wendigos, the rebellion a zombie uprising against the Bokor lords. Yet authenticity chills deeper in Blackwater Cove's own whispers. Local histories buried in Cornish folios recount the Tin Devil's Feast of 1832, a miners' strike where evicted workers stormed a mine captain's hall, the aftermath yielding missing ledgers and a sudden glut of game in taverns. No records name cannibals, but ballads linger. The iron pot boils red, sung in smugglers' dens of servants who turned the spit on master's hide. This tapestry, famine's forge, folklore's fangs, lends our tale unsettling verity. The Hawthorns, fictional yet archetypal, echo absentee landlords like the Marquis of Sligo, who exported food amid blight. The servants' Macabre turn, a distorted echo of 1798 Irish rebellion, where united Irishmen devoured British hearts in oath rituals, or the 1916 Easter Rising's blood sacraments. As we emerge from this historical fog, note the authenticity's bitey. These events scarred psyches, birthing a cultural lexicon of inverted feasts. The Iron Mansion's rebellion is no aberration. It is the repressed roar of the underclass, given voice in gore. And in our time, as inequalities nor a new food deserts in megacities, migrant crises echoing coffin ships, does the hunger not stir still? Listen close, for the past's bones rattle warnings, and the pot simmers eternal. With the blood barely congealed on the Iron Mansion's floors, let us not flee the scene, but dissect it, layer by flayed layer, like Magnus with his cleaver parting sinew from bone. For the cannibal servants transcends its visceral shocks. It is a scalpel to the human condition, carving open universal fears that fester in every breast, the dread of betrayal by those we deem beneath us, the primal terror of our own consumptive nature, the psychological rot when power devours the soul. We venture now into the thematic catacombs, where symbols loom like totems in the gloom and cultural traumas echo like thunder in a hollow chest. Tread warily, for analysis here is no academic detachment. It is a mirror held to your own hungers, reflecting shadows you dare not name. At its core, this tale is a parable of inverted hierarchies, a grotesque inversion of the Victorian social order where the upstairs-downstairs divide was as rigid as the mansion's iron gates. The servants embody the proletariat's suppressed rage, their cannibalism a hyperbolic metaphor for class warfare. Karl Marx, in Capital's 1867, described capitalism as vampiric. Capital comes dripping from head to foot, from every pore, with blood and dirt, exploiting labor until the worker is but a husk. The Iron Mansion literalizes this. The Hawthorns feed on the servants' toil, their larder stocked by colonial plunder, while below stairs starves. The rebellion's feast reverses the dialectic, thesis of oppression, antithesis of uprising, synthesis in mutual devouring. Psychologically, it evokes Frantz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth 1961, where colonized minds internalize inferiority until violence cathartically reclaims agency. Here, the servants' filed teeth and bone rosaries are talismans of decolonization, turning the master's gaze into prey. Yet deeper lurks the symbolism of hunger, not mere gastronomic want, but existential veracity. Hunger in folklore is never literal. It is the Ed Unchained, Freud's oral stage writ large, where incorporation becomes domination. The servants' pact, sealed over broken bread, echoes the Eucharist inverted body and blood, not divine redemption, but profane retribution. Julia Kristeva's Powers of Horror 1980 terms this objection. The horror of boundaries breached, self-mingling with other in the ultimate taboo, cannibalism. Eating Tom the Tinker is no accident, it is ritual incorporation, absorbing the outsider to fortify the collective against the mansion's maw. Universally, this taps the fear of consumption. We are what we eat, but also what eats us. Society devours the individual, turning dreamers to drones, lovers to laborers. The mansion itself is a character, a labyrinthine symbol of entrapment and surveillance, akin to Kafka's The Trial, where bureaucracy becomes castle. Its iron, cold, corrosive, mirrors Jeremy Bentham's Panopticon, the ideal prison where the watched internalize the gaze. Lady Isolde's eyes everywhere are panoptical, enforcing docility. The servants' rebellion shatters the lens, turning voyeurs to victims. Architecturally, Gothic revival elements, spires as fangs, balustrades as barbs, evoke Anne Radcliffe's terror sublime, where the subliminers are at vastness, tips to horror, dread of enclosure. The fog-shrouded cliffs amplify isolation, a nod to Lovecraftian cosmic indifference, humanity's hierarchies dwarfed by the sea's abyssal appetite. Psychologically, the characters fractalize human frailties. Magnus, the paternal chef, embodies the Jungian shadow, repressed savagery erupting in the cleaver as Excalibur motif, a phallic reclaiming of potency from emasculation. His famine scars are collective unconscious wounds, anima projections of Ireland's cointe, keening women into masculine fury. Eliza's arc traces trauma's cycle from victim, Theodore's grope to avenger ere her whispered, "You fed on us," a feminist reclamation echoing Judith Butler's performativity, gender roles as scripts rewritten in blood. The twins, with their Strigoi wards, symbolize duality, civilization's veneer over barbarism, their synchronized breaths a Freudian twinship of merged egos, devouring to preserve unity. Theodore and Isolde represent the bourgeoisie's blindness, Lacan's big other, whose symbolic order crumbles when the real intrudes. Gore is the unnameable. Isolde's fragility, corseted to porcelain cracks, symbolizes repressed maternity, her legacy, a barren throne, contrasting the servants' fertile rebellion. Their end, trust and tenderized, cathartes schadenfreude, purging viewer guilt over privilege, yet implicates us. Do we not feast on others' stories, consuming tragedy for thrill? Culturally, this weaves trauma tapestries. Irish famines diaspora birthed, famine ghosts, in literature. Joyce's Dubliners' hungers, Heaney's bog bodies unearthed as ancestral accusations. Scottish clearances fuel Walter Scott's romantic regret, but also Alastair Gray's socialist fury in Lanark. Eastern Europe's pogroms scar Kafka's Metamorphoses, Grossman's life and fate devouring souls in Stalin's maw. Collectively, they underscore cultural trauma, per Geoffrey Alexander, shared wounds transmitted generationally, manifesting in Gothic revivals where houses eat inhabitants, the fall of the House of Usher. Thematically, universal fears coalesce. Betrayals sting as servants as family turned feral, echoing Cain's mark. Bodily violation, cannibalism as ultimate rape, borders breached. And entropy's inevitability, the mansion's rust as times decay, rebellion devouring itself in endless hunger. Ecologically, it prefigures Anthropocene anxieties. Humanity as cancer consuming the planet, servants feast a microcosm of climate famines to come. Intellectually ominous, this tale probes, are we all cannibals? Supping on history's flesh via media, turning holocausts to hashtags. The lingering question in our hierarchies, who hungers most? The oppressor, sated yet insatiable, or the oppressed, whose rebellion risks becoming the new tyranny? Ponder this as shadows lengthen, the analysis ends, but the unease festers. And so, the Iron Mansion falls silent at last, its halls no longer echoing with waltzes or wails, but with the hush of bones settling into dust. The sea claims what the cleaver spares, tides lapping at cliffs stained with the residue of that macabre banquet. The servants, victors in their crimson coronation, reign over a throne of nightmares, sated for a season, perhaps, but hunger is a faithful hound, ever returning to heel. Lady Isolde's empire, built on the backs of the broken, crumbles not to revolution's fire, but to the slow rot of retribution, rust flaking from iron like scabs from old wounds. Theodore's dreams of legacy dissolve into the stew, his rapier a relic in the cold larder, gathering verdigris like forgotten tears. What remains? Whispers in Blackwater Cove, tales traded in taverns by fishermen mending nets under moonless skies. The constabulary, dispatched from distant London, finds naught but empty hooks and a ledger of vanishings. 20 souls ascended, they murmur, to some working-class Valhalla. No trials, no scaffolds, the empire averts its gaze from its own entrails. The mansion stands to this day, they say, though boarded and forsaken, its windows blind eyes weeping condensation like perpetual rain. Adventurers who breach its gates report drafts carrying the scent of roast. Impossible, for no hearth has burned since '92, and footprints in the dust, small and bare, circling the grand table as if awaiting guests. But the true haunting lies not in stone or spectre, but in the marrow of the tale itself. The cannibal servants lingers because it strips us bare, exposing the beast beneath our starched collars, the gnaw of envy in the boardroom, the bite of resentment at the welfare line, the feast of schadenfreude on social scrolls where the mighty tumble. It asks, in its chill calculus, who among us has not hungered for the flesh of our foes? Who has not dreamed, in the small hours, of turning the spit on those who portioned our portions too scant? The rebellion of the Iron Mansion is every uprising stifled, the French Revolution's guillotines dulled by Restoration, the Haymarket riots drowned in blood, the Arab Spring's blooms crushed under tanks. It is the universal undercurrent, the shadow economy of the soul, where the served sharpen teeth in the dark. As you sit in your own hearth's glow, listener, candle guttering, shadows pooling like spilled wine, feel the prickle at your nape. Is that a creak of floorboards or the stir of your own suppressed appetites? The hawthorns feasted on the world, and the world bit back. What banquets do you partake, and what hungers do you sow? The fog rolls eternal over Blackwater Cove, the sea a graveyard of what-ifs, and in its depths, perhaps the servants still sup, their laughter bubbling up like gas from the benthers. We leave you here, on the precipice, the tale's aftertaste metallic on the tongue. Sleep lightly, wanderers, for nightmares thrown not just in mansions of iron, but in the quiet chambers of the heart. Until next we summon the shadows, good night, and guard your portions well.